All right, it is 10 o'clock, so we're going to get started. For those that are just logging on, my name is Eric Hayden. I'm a meteorologist with the Weather Service at Morehead City, North Carolina. This is our flood SKYWARN presentation. It's one of a bunch of SKYWARNs that we do. The traditional SKYWARN is severe thunderstorms, tornadoes, high winds, and hail. This flood SKYWARN is going to talk a little bit more about flood history in our area, and we're going to really focus on how you can use a rain gauge to measure precipitation for the local area. This is the third year of us doing online classes. We've done this for a while now. The big difference is with our current situation, we're just expanding our options in terms of variety and how many classes we're doing. So where we would do 15 to 20 classes a year, maybe 2 or 3 were virtual. Now they're all virtual. In the next week, you're going to get a certificate of completion with this class. If you have any questions, visit our website. These links, including our website and the certificate, I'm going to talk about Cocoa Raws as a program, all that's going to be sent to you. So kind of just sit back and relax, enjoy the class, and then in the next week or so, I'll follow up with you. I always say the next week because it depends on the weather. If it gets crazy, it might take me a week. If things go well today, you can have it by this afternoon. So it's just going to depend on what we have in terms of weather here over the next week. I mentioned this to some of you already. For asking questions, you can do it through the webinar itself. All you need to do is click on the question button. Nobody else sees this except myself, so you don't have to worry about that. And you can also send those questions by raising your hand. So if you raise your hand, I'll look at the audience. We'll probably do this more at the end, and then I can take questions from you. I'll just unmute your phone line or your audio. So if you have a mobile device or if you have a computer with a microphone, you can ask a question that way. But again, if you don't have those features, it's okay because you can just do it through the chat as well. So as far as what we're going to go through, every class we talk about who the Weather Service is, why we need SKYWARN. And for some of you, this is going to be a repeat, but a lot of you are new. So that's why we always do that as a basis for our classes. The main features of this class are going to be flood history. We're going to go over flash flooding, how we can get heavy rain from tropical cyclones, and then we're going to review spotter procedures throughout the class itself. I already mentioned that this is just one of many classes we offer. The traditional 2 are basic spring, which occur in the springtime, thunderstorms, tornadoes, high winds, how to report that to us, and then the winter class, how to measure snow and ice. Those are our 2 main classes. They account for probably 80% of what we offer. Then throughout the year, we sprinkle in some extra classes. The flood class is an extra class. We don't do a lot of them. Tropical SKYWARN is another one. The focus for that is more hurricane history in our area. We don't do a lot of those. And then the third one is advanced SKYWARN. So 80% for the basic and winter, and then 20% for those other extra classes. All of our information is on our website, and again, our main goal is that you report severe weather to us throughout the year. You can stay current if this is your first class and you say, I really, really like it. By going to our website, if you scroll down, there's a section called YouTube training. We have a lot of information there. In addition, all of our previous classes, the advanced class, Cocoa Raws, the basic class, the winter class, all of that is online, either via YouTube or on our website itself. So if you get done here today and you say, I really want to take a couple more now, and I don't want to wait for a scheduled one, you can do that via our website. So we're going to talk a little bit about the Weather Service. We have over 100 offices in the country. Our main mission is to protect life and property. Our local office is Newport, Morehead City. So we're across the far eastern end of North Carolina. So this is our neck of the woods down here. I know sometimes we have some folks registered all across the country. If you're not from the local office, we'll still send you a certificate and we'll pass on your information to your local office, but it's really up to you to make that connection. You'll have your certificate. You can say, hey, I took the class, but you'll need to follow up with your local office in terms of the spotter number. And that'll be more clear here in a couple more slides. To focus on our area, again, we cover the far eastern part of North Carolina, so the Outer Banks down through the Crystal Coast, as far inland as Greenville and Snow Hill. We do cover the local waterways. So Anywhere shaded in yellow we cover. That of course includes the land, but the Pamlico Sound, the Albemarle Sound, this boxed area here is out to 20 nautical miles. So if you've ever been on a boat or in the ocean, the Weather Service does forecasts for those folks. This blue shaded area is beyond 20 miles, and we do warnings for those waters, and then a larger agency within the Weather Service called the Ocean Prediction Center does a forecast for that area. No matter where you live, no matter who your local office is, we are open 24/7, 365 days a year. So that's all the time. Christmas, Thanksgiving, Halloween, Sunday nights, we're always there. And we usually have a staff of about 20 to 25 people. If you visit us on a day like today where it's pretty quiet, maybe only 2 of us are there. If you visit us during Florence, like the picture in the upper left, the whole staff was there. In fact, we were there between 3 and 7 days nonstop. We didn't leave the office. Many of our buildings, like ourselves, are built for that. So it's a brick building with hurricane shutters. We're up high, so we're in a safe location. This is actually my office. I've got my airbed, and I could sleep in the office, so it wasn't a huge deal. So we're designed there to protect life and property. We stay when it gets bad to serve you in the community. Where SKYWARN comes in, it's a volunteer program run by the Weather Service, and the goal is to produce ground truth reports to us. And that simply means what's happening. So with flooding, are you seeing flooding? How deep is it? What's being impacted? How much rain do you have? That type of thing. And this is an example of coastal flooding that we get along the Outer Banks. Our flood SKYWARN is unique because unlike an inland office where we talk about flash flooding and maybe river flooding, we talk about those 2 aspects, but we add one more, coastal flooding, since we live along the ocean. Spotters really help us measure reports or gauge how bad a storm is. So in the case of flooding, you tell us how deep the water is. That creek in your backyard, you tell us that it's never been that high before, and it's something that you've never seen before. So you really provide life-saving information that we can take and put into our warning and add additional information for folks that are farther downstream and may not realize how bad it is yet. A couple fundamental definitions: watches, warnings, and what a flash flood is. Any type of watch means that conditions are favorable for that to happen. So if it's flooding, it means that conditions are favorable for flooding. If it's a tornado, it means conditions are favorable. Doesn't mean it's going to happen. It just means all the ingredients are there to make it likely or favorable for it to occur. If we issue a warning, that means it's imminent or already occurring. So we can issue those. They could be flash floods, winter storms, blizzards, things like that. The good example of that, I like to do a lot of baking, and a watch would be you're making cookies. I love oatmeal raisin cookies. So you've got the oatmeal out, you've got the flour, you've got the sugar, the brown sugar, all the ingredients are there. The oven's preheating. You know what's probably happening, but it hasn't happened yet. That would be a watch. All the ingredients are in place. A warning would be the oven timer's going off. You can smell the cookies, they're coming out of the oven. It is happening. So that's kind of the analogy. A watch means it's favorable, but hasn't happened yet. And a warning means it is occurring or imminent. Our definition of a flash flood is flooding that begins within 6 hours, so a real short time frame, and often this is less than 3 hours. So it rains really hard, and then the rivers, creeks, or waterways come up. And this is usually caused by heavy rain, but you could have dam breaks and snow melt up north, ice jams, and other reasons to cause that. Before we go too much further, I want to talk a little bit about our website. It's weather.gov. If you live anywhere in the country, just go to weather.gov and you'll be set. The difference with ours is it's weather.gov/Newport. That will get you the local office, weather information from past events. You can click anywhere on the website. If you click anywhere on this map or enter your city or zip code, you can get a local forecast. And we'll kind of show you the basic forecast and then how you can get more detail. So weather.gov, click on your area of interest in the country. Again, if it's locally, it's just /Newport. And from that, you get a 7-day forecast, kind of a quick and dirty, high and low temperature. Is it going to rain or snow? and then some more details, wind speed, chance of rain here over the next 7 days. So very, very basic. If you scroll down on the page, on the lower right is an hourly weather forecast. And from that, you can really get into the details. In this example, it defaults to a lot of variables: temperature, dew point, wind, cloud cover. Maybe you don't care about that. So I like to uncheck everything and check only what I care about. So in this case, it's temperature, wind speed, and cloud cover. And you can see how it varies over the next 48 hours. So this is really useful. You might want to display rainfall. You can see the graph go up and down. If you click on the graph, it actually becomes a digital format. So really, really nice. You might say, well, hey, I can do the same thing on the phone. We'll talk about that with our mobile site in a second. We do weather briefings when the weather is bad. Again, our website, but you want to scroll down to the bottom of the page, and there's a lot of icons. Here's our SKYWARN icon, but you want to click on the weather hazard briefing. And again, we only do these during the big weather events. So last Monday, not this past one, but the one before, where we had 6 tornadoes in our area, we had briefings leading up to it. It's a PDF, 5 to maybe as much as 15 images, and you'll just scroll through on your phone. And if you have a couple minutes, you're going to get a lot of details on the weather. This is not a quick 30-second glance. The example on the left is from Florence. We are trying to emphasize the aspect of flooding. And on the right is a winter storm we had a couple years ago in January. Again, snowfall maps, severe weather maps, all kinds of information there. If you haven't followed us on social media, you're missing out. We're on YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook. Just search NWS Morehead City. We really use it to get our message out. So in the example on the left is a tweet during Florence. If you live locally, you remember Florence was a Category 4 at one point, and then the storm gradually diminished in terms of just category. A category only talks about wind speed. It says nothing about rain or storm surge or flooding potential. So we tried to emphasize that despite the category lowering, our impacts were still going to be pretty bad. And on the right is YouTube. We do a lot of recordings on there. It's not as consistent as Facebook or Twitter, but like this recording is already up there from our original class. Our SKYWARN presentations, we've got some videos on gustnados and tornadoes and some different types of things on there. I mentioned mobile forecast. If you want to get an hourly forecast, just go to mobile.weather.gov. It's not an app, but if you pull it up in your browser, whether it's Safari on the iPhone or Chrome on Android or whatever phone you have, if you just navigate to mobile.weather.gov, and if you save it to your home screen, you can do that. You can Google how to do that. It'll put an icon on your phone, and it will act very similar to an app. And that's where you can get your detailed forecast on our mobile platform. All right, before we get into the class in terms of history, we've kind of laid the groundwork. We're at about the 13-minute mark, who the Weather Service is, why we need spotters. We do want you to make reports, and we're going to talk about how to make those reports and what to report coming up. The most favorable way when you get flooding or heavy rain is to call our office. If you do not live in Eastern North Carolina, this is where you need to follow up with your local office. If you call this number and you're in Maine or Wisconsin, we're not gonna, that report's not valid for us. You need to hook up with your local office after this class. The procedure is the same though. No matter where you live, you identify yourself, who you are. I'm a SKYWARN spotter, what you saw, where, and when. And then we like the 800 number because we can ask you questions and we can follow up if there needs to be any clarification. In addition, it's urgent. We answer that number 24/7. And we want to know right away, like if there's a tornado or bad rain and things like that. Our email address is another way you can get a hold of us. And again, this is only locally. If you don't live in the area, follow up with your local office. We'll try to make that connection for you. And you'll have a different email and phone number to call and email in on. Email is good for sending us pictures. We prefer you call us first so we know about it, and then you follow up maybe with an email. And again, same procedure, who you are, what you saw, where, and when. So now we're going to go through the different ways we can get flooding in our area. Most of you probably already surmised some of our worst flooding comes from hurricanes, But we're going to cover some other aspects of flooding that we don't need a big tropical system to always get our flooding, and we'll go over that here in a second. Before we go on to hurricanes a little bit, want to explain how they can form and how they get their energy. Hurricanes are called hurricanes in the Atlantic Ocean and the Central and Eastern Pacific, but they're actually called different things all around the world. A Willy Willy down by the coast of Australia, they're called typhoons in the Western Pacific, and cyclones in the Indian Ocean. They're all the same thing, but they're called different things depending on where you are in the world. Hurricanes are fueled by warm ocean water. And this is why hurricane season starts in the late spring and lasts right into the fall when our water is warming up. We can't have a hurricane in the winter. We need warm water, preferably 80 degrees or higher. And what happens is this warm water fuels showers and thunderstorms. And as that air rises, cools, and condenses, areas of low pressure can form, and eventually we can get tropical cyclones and a hurricane. You've probably heard of the eye of the hurricane. That's the center part of the storm. That's where we track it in terms of the center of the circulation. That's really where the light winds are. It could be sunny, and the lowest pressure. Again, right in the middle of the eye, the air is rising very, very strongly. That's the center of the storm itself. But it's tricky. Right around the eye, it's called the eye wall. That's where we have the strongest winds and the heaviest rain. So that's really the worst part of the storm. So if you've seen a forecast, where is the eye going to go, or the center part, that's because that is typically where you get the strongest winds and heavy rain. It's important to point out, though, a hurricane is not just a center or not just a dart or a dot on the map. It's very, very large. Sometimes in the case of Hurricane Irene, many hundreds of miles wide. So even though the center might not hit you, the impact can be wide. And that's what these spiral rain bands are. They can produce heavy rain and gusty winds. They're rotating, so especially the outer bands can also produce tornadoes as they make landfall. And we go more in depth on hurricanes in the tropical class. The reason we're talking about this, we want to set the stage for how we've had some historical flooding, because this is a flood SKYWARN. One of the biggies is, of course, Hurricane Floyd. It's what everybody measured flooding against until we had Florence. With Hurricane Floyd, we had up to 24 inches of rain to our south in Southport. And this area right here is 10 to 20 plus inches of rain. Again, mainly just west of the Morehead City area over toward I-95 and our inland counties, Duplin, Lenoir, those types of places. This is a picture of Grifton, the flooding that happened. You can see only the rooftops to point out how devastating the flood was in our area. And at the time, and for a long, long time, that was what we measured historical flooding against in our area. We certainly had Matthew and Florence, which we'll talk about, but Floyd was the big one in terms of flooding in our area initially. So we're talking about flooding. We can get flooding during a tropical system. That rain goes over the same area over and over again, called training, and that can produce flash flooding. Another way we can get flash flooding is just from a thunderstorm. We don't have a big tropical storm or a hurricane, but we had 10 inches of rain in 4 hours in Havelock in 2009. 10 inches of rain is going to cause a problem, especially in urban areas. This picture on the left is showing a flooded out road. If this were to occur in a farmland or forest, there may still be issues along smaller creeks, but a lot of that water is going to be absorbed. But when it happens in an urban environment, it hits surfaces that can't suck up the water. It's really going to cause some issues. This is a radar. We can estimate how much rain has fallen, and it's hard to see, but generally less than an inch, this whole blue area. So not too much here, up toward New Bern and places like that, or north of New Bern, or more Greenville. From New Bern south, an inch or two of rain, but this red is indicating 6 to as much as 8 or 9 inches of rain had fallen in a very, very narrow area. We have a sea breeze that comes in usually daily, and those storms just kind of stalled along that. So we cover we can get heavy rain from hurricanes for sure. We cover we can get it from run-of-the-mill thunderstorms that don't move anywhere. We can also get nor'easters, especially in the fall through the winter time, that can produce coastal flooding but also heavy rain. So the one reason why I was talking about that, was we can have different types of flooding in our area. With this case, Hurricane Joaquin was well out into the ocean, but we had an area of low pressure and a feed of moisture that produced a lot of rain across the Carolinas. The image on the right is flooding in downtown Beaufort, and that is from the water being piled up from that storm itself. So areas down East Carteret County, the Outer Banks, along the Pamlico Sound, Albemarle Sound, we can certainly get coastal flooding from that water piling up. Hurricane Matthew in 2016 produced a lot of heavy rain. We mentioned when we talked about the hurricane section, those spiral bands of rain as they rotate on can produce very, very heavy rain. So not everybody will see it, but notice these purple areas indicating, in this case, more than 6 inches of rain come in these banded features. Not everybody saw it, but we certainly saw some heavy rain, especially inland areas. The center of the storm remained off the coast of the Carolinas. So this reemphasizes just because you're not right at the center doesn't mean you're not going to escape some heavy rain or wind. This is a state map. You can see 10 to 15 inches of rain fell kind of in a similar location to what we had with Floyd in 1999. So inland areas were definitely hit the hardest. These are some pictures from Vanceboro during Matthew. Always advised not to drive through flooded roads. We'll show you why in a second. This is showing the velocity, the speed of the water up toward Grifton, flooding, and then you can see those ripples and waves. This is, again, a smaller creek and river that usually doesn't have a high flow, so very impressive for that. This is near Hookerton. You can see that the water is covering the road, and our big campaign with that is Turn Around, Don't Drown. But with that, sometimes you can get the road itself is actually washed out and doesn't exist. So the water can carry you away, and the road may not exist. So you certainly have to be careful for that. Our most recent one is certainly Hurricane Florence. You can see the storm off the coast here the morning of Thursday, the 13th of 2018, September. These are some rainfall amounts, 15 to 34 inches. To put that in perspective, depending where you are, our average can be close to 50 inches, 45, 50 inches a year. So we almost had a year's worth of rain in a 4-day period. So very, very impressive rainfall totals. This is our forecast area. Again, 20 to 30 inches, Jacksonville, Swansboro, Emerald Isle, Morehead City, Newport. 18 or so inches up toward New Bern, back across Duplin County. Greenville around 10 inches, and then only 2 inches up toward the northern Outer Banks. I use this map for a couple reasons. Number one, the heaviest rain fell across the southern part of our area, but notice the gradient. That's the change between 30 inches and 2 inches. Very, very short distance. If that storm had shifted 50 miles to the north, other folks would have been under the risk for heavy rain. So when you see a landfalling hurricane, you see that forecast map, again, give it some wiggle room. If you're seeing a forecast prediction of heavy rain and you're just out of the bullseye of heavy rain, don't let your guard down, because just a small shift can certainly shift these around. We were not alone in terms of heavy rain. Back toward the South Carolina border in the Wilmington area, again, 20 to 30 inches of rain. Even all the way up into Southwest Virginia, they had 6+ inches of rainfall. All right, we did have historic river flooding. Remember back in the beginning, I mentioned Floyd was kind of the one we measure everything against. It exceeded Hurricane Floyd records. So the flood of record, the Cape Fear River near Chinquapin was 23.5. We crested well above that. And then again, I mentioned that you see water across a road, it can sweep you away, or it can cover up the fact that the road no longer exists. So you do not want to cross flooded roads. Our big campaign with that is Turn Around, Don't Drown. Another record crest with Floyd was Trent River at Pollocksville. And again, for the old timers that have been here for a while, when we mention higher than Floyd, that really offers a lot of perspective for how bad that flooding was. So we certainly want you to report flooding to us, something significant. Again, not talking about ponding water that always occurs. How deep is the water? I do not want you going out there with a yardstick and measuring, but tell us it's up to the car, hubcaps, it's up to the stop sign, something I haven't seen before. If you live along the coast, how high is the water above normal, especially during storms? A lot of you might have a gauge, and you know the water level is usually this. Are you a couple feet above your average? That's useful information. If you're in Beaufort or one of these places on the Outer Banks that see ocean overwash frequently, let us know. Are you seeing flooding? Is it nuisance? Is it something that that you haven't seen that often? Please let us know. Really want to emphasize getting a rain gauge. They're very, very useful. You can let us know when you get roughly an inch of rain in a day or an hour or less. And I say this because sometimes we'll have people call in with a real light rainfall amount. And it's not that we don't like the report, but if you called in every time it rained, you would be calling in quite frequently during the summer. So roughly an inch in a short period of time or in a day, let us know how much rain you've gotten. We're going to now talk a lot about Cocoa Raws. We're at the 25-minute mark, probably about 15 more minutes, and then we'll wrap things up. Be thinking of questions you have for me. You can ask them in the chat, and then again, you can raise your hand, and we'll take those at the end. I'm going to send you this link so you can jot it down if you want, but you'll have it shortly. It's cocoaraws.org. This is where you can buy a rain gauge. You can sign up for training. Most of the training we're going to quickly go through now. Great program. You can report precipitation every day. It has an app that you can download. So most of the time you'll just be entering 0 because we don't get rain every single day. But when you get rain, you want to measure it and send that report in. We get those reports at the Weather Service. So that's one way you can report. And then once you get a gauge like this, the standard with Cocoa Raws is to report every morning between 7 and 9. We want you to be consistent. If you miss a day here and there, it's okay. But with that gauge, if you get, say, a heavy thunderstorm in the evening and you get 4 inches of rain in a short period of time, call us and let us know how much rain you had. When you have a professional gauge like this, you can do that. So we're going to go over how to get the gauge and how to set it up and measure precipitation. You'll notice that we're focusing in on this 4-inch rain gauge. There are digital rain gauges. They're okay, but they can underestimate because they have a mechanism in there called a tipping bucket that it goes back and forth depending on the rainfall, and it can underestimate in a heavy rainfall. So the 4-inch gauge, it's about $35. It is preferred for accuracy. And it's called a 4-inch gauge because there's a 4-inch opening on top. So we're going to talk a lot about location. With the rain gauge, you want to be accurate. You're not going to be accurate if it never gets out of the box or if you put it under your downspout. So don't leave it in the box. Don't put it under your downspout. You also want to be away from tall objects. So you don't want it to be under a tree. Sometimes a deck is a nice place to attach it to wood, but it's still kind of close to your house. So ideally, you want to be away from things like that. And certainly if you have an irrigation system in your yard, you don't want it to be getting hit by the sprinklers. A fence is a really nice place to anchor it to. We have fences in our community, and it makes sense that you might think that would be a good place to anchor it to. And it is from an anchoring standpoint, but from an accuracy standpoint, it's not good because you can get some extra wind over the fence itself, and that can actually decrease how much rain is going into it. So kind of stay away from fences. Your ideal place is going to vary depending on where you live. Roughly, you want it about chest level, 4 or 5 feet. You don't want it up really high because the higher you go in the atmosphere, the windier it gets. You're getting away from the friction of the earth. So you don't want it on a rooftop. That might be your only location in an urban setting. And in a residential rural location, you just want to be as far away from trees and tall objects as possible. You'll notice that if you're in a rural setting, sometimes you can put the gauge a little lower. You might be real windy. Basically, anything a couple feet above ground is going to make sure nothing splashes in it and no animals are messing with it. So roughly, 2 or 3 feet, maybe 5 feet is that range you're looking for. In terms of trees and tall objects, you want to be roughly twice as far away. You don't have to do exact math, but if you have, like me, 30, maybe 40-foot trees, not super tall, you want to be 60 to 80 feet away. Again, you don't need a ruler. Just look at your yard and say, hey, this is roughly the middle between everything, and go with it. Get as ideal as you can. Your spot is not going to be like my spot, and it's not going to be like your neighbor's. If you have a lot of trees, that's just what it is. Just get as far away as you can. If you have them really close because you live in the woods, you just do the best you can. You can probably compare to your neighbors that are Cocoa Raws members that there may not be a significant difference. We're just encouraging you to do as well as you can. I mentioned the height above ground, roughly chest level. The only example of this is if you have a big open field, it's going to be windier, so you might want to go just a little lower to make it more accurate. 2 feet, again, is high enough. Animals and things like that aren't going to mess with it as much. And if you're in a suburban area, you already have enough trees and buildings around. It doesn't get as windy. 5 feet is more than fine. You certainly want to make sure the gauge is level. As I get this drink, I'll use this as an example. If this is your rain gauge, again, it is a 4-inch opening, so a little bit more than this. You don't want it at an angle. It's not going to capture those raindrops accurately. You want that level facing up toward the sky so that it's measuring the rain as well as possible. You'll notice on a lot of these images, there's a piece of wood and it's on the right, and that's what it's attached to. This is a 4x4. I got one at a local hardware store. I got somebody to help me cut it at that angle. And if you do that, it's very, very sturdy and super secure. The gauge will come with a bracket with screws, and it can screw right into that. This is probably the best way to install it. And if you do that, you want to angle the bevel away from the gauge so that there's no chance that the water's going to run off into it. If you put it on one of these things, it's going to last a long, long time. So that's why I don't know if they explicitly have that on their website, but the 4x4 is good. And I think at the big box store, they sell them in 5-foot sections, already pre-cut. So I dug a hole and put it into the ground a little bit more, and it's probably 3 feet. So that kind of gives you your depth. So now we're going to talk a little bit about measuring with the rain gauge itself. We're going to talk a lot about the decimal point. So this inner tube, kind of hard to see in here, but it comes in 2 pieces. There's an inner tube, and that measures up to 1 inch. And if it overflows, then there's an outside reservoir. That inner tube measures up to 1 inch, and then the reservoir holds another 10 inches. So it actually has an 11-inch capacity. But you're going to be using that inner tube for measuring the amount, and it has decibels because it's 1/100 of an inch. So when you use that inner tube, you'll see that it goes in increments from 0.1 to 0.2 to all the way up to 0.9. Each tick is 1/100 of an inch, 0.01, 0.02. Very important about decimals. When you see that it says 0.4, that does not mean 4 inches of rain, it means 4/10. And that's a big difference between the two. When you're measuring in the gauge, you want to look at the meniscus. Because of the surface tension of the liquid in contact with the sides, it actually curves a little bit. So you actually want to measure the bottom of that curve. So in this case, right about 4/10 of an inch. Here's what I mean about the gauge itself. So when it fills up to 0.5, that's about 1/2 inch. Here's 0.4, 0.3. And again, if it was just 1 tick above this, that would be 0.51, 0.52, 0.53. So there's 100 ticks or little marks on that. And if it fills up to 1.11 or 1.00, it's 1 inch. So the inner tube measures 1 inch. What happens if you get more than 1 inch of rain? Obviously, that can happen here quite frequently. What happens is it overflows into the reservoir, and you need to use that inner tube to measure how much rain fell. And I'll explain that here in a second. So to measure greater than 1 inch, you pour out the first inch that's in the inner tube. And I usually write this down because if you're doing it over and over again, you might say, is that the second or third time I emptied it out? So empty out the inner tube. You know you've already had 1 inch, write it down. Now use the funnel on the top of the gauge, put that into the inner tube, and take your bigger gauge, the reservoir, and start to slowly pour the water in and measure it out. And you might have to do this a couple times. So in this example, we had 1 inch of rain in the inner tube, tossed it out. We know we have 1 inch. Now we use the funnel, we started to slowly pour the water in, and we got up to 0.97, and we said that's close enough. We write it down, empty it out, and we keep repeating that process. So hopefully you understand you're just using the funnel and the inner tube to continually measure how much was in the reservoir. So in this case, it was 3 inches, so you're gonna have to repeat that a couple times. All right, a couple more ways to make your report. We're going to talk about social media, and then we're going to wrap things up because we're just about the 35-minute mark. You can make a report on social media. Again, the 800 number is preferred. We answer the phone 24/7. Facebook, Twitter, we look at it, but it may be a couple hours depending on how much staffing we have to look at it. If you do report anyway, make sure you say who you are, what you saw, and where and when. And in this case, it would be how much rain you had and if you had any flooding. As I wrap this class up, I want to review some other things you should be reporting. There's way more information in the basic class and advanced class on this. We always mention it because our goal is that you're a year-round spotter. The likelihood of you having a tornado or really high winds, luckily, is low. We're doing a 24 or a year-round class schedule to train you how to report more common things like heavy rain and maybe hail or flooding. That way you get used to calling us and you know the routine, who you are, what to report, when, and where you're located. If you have any tornadoes or funnel clouds, we want to know about that. It's got to be rotating. And again, please review the basic class if you want more confirmation on that. Any amount of hail, we want to know about it. We want to know the size. So either measure it with a ruler after the storm has passed or compare it to something like coins, golf balls, hopefully not softballs. You don't want to use marbles because those vary in size. And we mentioned flooding and any type of wind damage, our branches down, trees uprooted, that type of thing. We're well removed from this, but next year when we get snow in our area, we want you to report snow. You can do it through Cocoa Raws. There's training on that on the website. And you want to measure the snow to the nearest 1/10 of an inch. We want an average, so just take your ruler and measure in a couple spots in the yard. Any amount of ice, the measurement is not as crucial with that as, hey, we're getting freezing rain, the roads are icing up, that type of thing. So that is it. We're just shy of the 40-minute mark. For those that have not taken a class with us before, we're going to turn it over to you now for questions. Our in-person classes tend to be about 1 hour and 10 minutes. Our virtual classes, I like to keep under 40 minutes because I don't know how interesting this is to you. I can't see your reaction. I can't see how the material is. So we try to keep it concise, show you what we want, and then move on from that.